We have to call this for what it is. This is a systematic destruction of civilian life. This is a destruction of a people, and this is a genocide, and you can't rationalize a genocide.
Joining centre stage today is Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, a British-Australian emergency physician who's volunteered twice in medical postings in Gaza, where he treated victims of Israel's sustained war. Dr. Mustafa's ties to Gaza extend outside of his work in hospitals. He is of Palestinian heritage, his family from Gaza. Mohammed was also part of the Gaza Flotilla organising team and took part in the International Global March to Gaza initiative. We'll also discuss if the ongoing political pressure on Israel and international recognition of Palestinian statehood may bring about an end to Israel's war on Gaza and provide a safe, prosperous future for Palestinians. Dr. Mo, welcome to Centre Stage. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start on what's happening in Gaza right now. In the connected Western world, people are seeing these images all the time on their phones, on their televisions, but there is a sense of detachment. They turn the phone off, they turn the TV off, they may be horrified, but they then go back to it another day. What is it that makes somebody say, I've had enough of this, I'm off, which is what you did?
When you're there in Gaza, when you scroll on a screen, you can maybe look at these images for 30 seconds and turn away. But that child who's got his leg missing, who has his intestines hanging out, you can't scroll away when you're there. You have to watch this child in the corner of the emergency room bleed out to death on the floor. You have to watch them as they gasp in pain, and you have no painkillers. And you have to watch them as they slowly die. And if they do survive in the ER, you have to go to the wards every single day for 3, 4, 5 days, however long they survive, and wait till the maggots start growing out of their wounds. The situation in Gaza is beyond catastrophic. And, for me, when I saw those images, I really thought to ourselves, this is a pivotal moment in history, what's going on in Gaza. The sheer destruction, the force, the intent that was stated by the Israeli government at the start of this, you knew what was going to come. And growing up as a Palestinian refugee, I always knew how dehumanized Palestinians were, but I knew that this was going to be, a genocide right from the start. And that's why I wanted to be there. I wanted to be there to help those people.
Yeah, I'm no doctor, but the way you describe that, in any other country, any other civilized nation, there is a procedure where if things are bad, there's always somewhere to reach up to get extra help. There's always somewhere you can go. And from what you described, that just is not a possibility there.
We have our bags searched before we go into Gaza. Baby formula is taken out of our bags. Medicine is taken out of our bags. We're banned from even taking in large amounts of money. So, when we go into Gaza, we go there with nothing. And whatever infrastructure is in Gaza, whatever medicines are in Gaza, that's all we have. And, they're systematically destroyed. The leading doctors are either killed, kidnapped, tortured, targeted. And what you're left with is a shortage of senior doctors and nurses. And what's coming in through the front door is hundreds of injured when you have some of these mass casualty events. And you have a first aid kit, and you're dealing with people who have 80% body burns. You're dealing with children with missing limbs. You're dealing with kids whose skulls have been crushed from buildings collapsing on them. That's what you're dealing with. And you don't even have a painkiller for these children. You don't even have ventilators to put people in medically induced comas. You just have to sit there and watch them die. And you pick and choose who lives and who dies, because the one ventilator that you might have, you have 50 people that should get a ventilator.
How do you make that choice? On a human level, how do you even begin to decide?
I don't think many doctors, when they leave Gaza, I don't think they ever come out the same. It's inhumane to make that decision of who lives and who dies. It's inhumane when you have to remove the bandages off a child from their burn wounds and there's no painkillers and you're ripping off the skin that's formed. But you have to do this in order to keep the wounds clean so they don't get infected and they don't die. And you're peeling this off and you're essentially skinning a child alive. When you go into Gaza, you feel more like a butcher than you do a doctor.
And you went twice.
I was there for some of the worst mass casualty events of the war. I was there the day that the Israelis rescued 4 Israeli hostages, and they killed and injured 1,400 people in a couple of hours. And they all came pouring into our hospitals. And, I remember in the ER, we had this one man who'd come in and his face from here, his jaw had been blown off and he had half a face missing. And, he's just sat there quietly in the corner with half a face missing. And he's not even the sickest person there. He's not even the one that needs our attention. We have others who are in more critical condition than him. And I remember, it was about 3-4 hours in, and I walked over to him and I said, "How's the pain?" And he just looked at me because obviously he can't talk, half his jaw's missing. And, I had with me a local sedative, like a local anesthetic. And I literally pulled up the meat of his cheek and I injected him with a local anesthetic to numb that part of his face. That's all I could offer him. And, when that happened, he smiled at me, with whatever he could. And he nodded and he said, as if to say, that's helping him feel a bit better. The maxfac surgeon, the maxillofacial surgeon that was meant to come in with us, who could have operated on him, wasn't allowed in because Israel routinely denies entrance to 50% of the doctors that go into Gaza, especially surgeons. So this man was just languishing with half a missing face for, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks before somebody was able to operate on him.
And he knew that you were his best hope. You were doing as much as you could with what little you had.
That's the reality of Gaza, and that was June last year. The situation has become increasingly more catastrophic than it was back then. And, sometimes the frustrating thing is when you're watching news channels and you're watching people talking about Gaza like this is, some kind of political football. When that happens and you're sat there and you're in this Mad Max apocalyptic scene, and these people are human beings. They deserve a level of sympathy from us. They deserve basic standard care. They deserve painkillers. The children, the babies that are newly born deserve baby formula to eat. And when these things are not provided, what happens is you see this level of dehumanization that we and me and you and everybody else, we've never experienced before. But when you're there and you see how little help is coming in, how people talk about this like it's not a big deal, it really affects you as a doctor when you're there. And I think really what happened is the dehumanization of those Palestinian people has dehumanized us all. When you look at images of children that have been killed every day for 2 years, you become numb to those images. You scroll past them without thinking about it. And what happens is the dehumanization of Palestinians not only dehumanizes Palestinians, it dehumanizes the Israelis that are doing this to the Palestinians, the IDF. It also dehumanizes us as the audience watching this of what's happening. And we're all dehumanized by this. And sometimes we have to take a step back from politics and be human beings and understand that what's going on in Gaza affects us all on a human level.
Do you think it's all dehumanization though, or is it some people just, they can't bear to look at it? I mean, their problems in looking at it are minimal compared to what's happening there, but they just feel like there's nothing I can do. I can't look at this.
People are sometimes protecting their own humanity by not looking at it. But again, that's another way of dehumanizing yourself, where you choose to look away from the suffering of other people. It's not who we are as human beings. And the reason why I've been out and I've been campaigning is I don't want to live in that world where we have to look away in order to salvage our own humanity. I don't want us to look away. I want us to be able to face and deal with these problems head on so it doesn't happen again. So when we say never again, we mean never again for anybody else.
You talk about the politicization of it, and a lot of the media, particularly here in the United States, puts Hamas and the Palestinian people together. And Israel says that, it's been criticized for targeting hospitals, but it says, they're being used by Hamas to store weapons and as human shields. In your experience of being in hospitals, I mean, what would you say to that?
I mean, I don't even entertain these questions anymore. When you've destroyed 90% of the infrastructure in Gaza, and, Hamas worth, 30,000, 40,000 troops? Gaza is 2.4 million people before the war, 2.3 million. And they've destroyed hundreds of thousands of homes. You're talking about if one Hamas militant was embedded in 5 homes, two schools, a hospital each. You know, it's irrational now. Those argument and those contention points are irrational, and they're illogical. And I think like we have to move away from even giving credence to these talking points anymore. You know, we have to call this for what it is. This is a systematic destruction of civilian life. This is a destruction of a people, and this is a genocide. And you can't rationalize a genocide. And that's the problem is you've got one side saying it's a genocide, and you've got another side saying that, oh no, it's okay for us to bomb hospitals and schools and cut off food and water because of this mysterious boogeyman.
People obviously know Gaza from what they see on television.
Yeah.
It's often referred to as the world's largest open air prison because
Yes.
you can't get in or out.
Mhm.
But to people who've never been there and don't understand the logistics of just getting in and out,
Yeah.
past those checkpoints, past those borders,
Yeah.
past all that military presence,
Mhm.
what's the first thing that strikes you when you get through that gate and it slams shut behind you?
The first time that we went in there, because outside of Gaza, you have these fields and these farms and this greenery, and it's really beautiful. The moment that you go through those, 30, 40 feet high cement walls and you go into Gaza, and it's just dust and rubble. And as you're driving through, there's the aid that's on the floor that's fallen off trucks as they've driven in. There's dead bodies next to that aid that's fallen because they've tried to pick up that aid and they've been shot and they've been left there. And you go in and you see dogs rummaging through the rubble, pulling out pieces of human to eat at. And you just see these people living in amongst on the streets in tents. You see the destruction, no standing buildings for miles on end.
You know, people often talk about, and you've alluded to it, how the healthcare system there is just collapsing.
Yeah.
Is it collapsing or has it collapsed completely already?
Look, the healthcare system had collapsed a long time ago. I wouldn't be comfortable calling it a healthcare system, and this comes into part of the dehumanization of Palestinian people. We wouldn't accept this for anywhere else in the world to call it a healthcare system. Like I say to you, these are bombed out buildings. These are buildings that have their entire infrastructure destroyed. And we are still trying to operate on patients with a wall missing, with leaks from the roof, with no running water, sometimes with power cuts while you're operating on people. This isn't a healthcare system. Like I say, this is just a glorified first aid service that we're running.
Surely you need some downtime, for want of a better phrase. Like there must come a point in the day where you just think, I need to process everything I've seen today.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Or do you have to put it on the back burner for weeks until you get back outside Gaza?
Do you know, when we were there in Gaza, sometimes after you'd have a mass casualty event and you'd spend hours in the ER and you'd come up to your room. It wasn't uncommon for you to break down in your room. It wasn't uncommon for me to break down, the nurse that I was with to break down. It wouldn't take long because I remember sometimes we'd have to do interviews, while we were there in Gaza, and you'd put your phone on a stand and they would ask you a question and you'd just start crying, you'd just break down into tears. And that happened a few times while we were in Gaza. But, you just have to pat yourself down and keep going. And, since I've come back from Gaza, the way that I've processed this is just to keep on the road, keep talking about Gaza, keep trying to get governments to mobilize, because the situation in Gaza is beyond catastrophic. And we're at risk here of losing 1 million children, not because 1 million children have been killed, but 1 million children have gone through starvation, have seen their family members killed, the largest cohort of child amputees, largest cohort per capita of orphans now. This is what we've got now with this generation. They haven't had their vaccines in 2 years. They haven't been to school for 2 years. Most of them have some form of PTSD. Almost all of them have some form of malnutrition, if not full famine and starvation. This is going to affect them now for the rest of their lives. The level of starvation that's in Gaza now will change the DNA of these children. They will forever be affected by this. And the generation that they produce, their offspring, will carry those genes. That's how dire the situation is. And unless the world begins to realize that just recognizing a Palestinian state does nothing for the ground on Gaza. The issue here in Gaza now is going to be a long-term rehabilitation process of the entire population. And all I hear on the news is when they build this Palestinian state, we need to re-educate these children so they don't hate. I'm thinking, is this all they're concerned about here? These children haven't had a proper meal in 2 years, haven't been to school for 2 years. And we're talking about educating them so they don't hate the people that did this to them. Surely we should be concentrating on keeping them alive now. And we should be concentrating on getting justice for these people. Because you can't have peace without justice. You can't have peace without reconciliation. Otherwise, it's just another ceasefire.
How do you focus on what you're doing when quite literally there are bombs going off left, right, and center? You've got drones overhead, and you must be scared at the same time. But how do you avoid that very human instinct to just run to save yourself when you're there? Because
do you know, I remember when there was a bomb that went off about 50 meters outside the emergency department where we were. And I remember being quite, because the roof tiles, some of them had caved in. That's how close it was. And I remember just panicking. And this child, an 11-year-old boy, just grabbed my hand. He said to me, "Ya doctor, the quayes." He said, "Doctor, are you okay?" I remember thinking to myself, this child was more concerned about me because he knew I was an outsider and I'm not used to this. He was more concerned about me. And I think when you see that these children in Gaza are concerned about you because they know that you're not used to this and they don't want you to be in distress, you fight harder for them.
It's not your world.
Yeah.
You talked about the politics side of it. Obviously, we've seen a number of countries recognize Palestine as a state, and you've been making a lot of noise in Australia about this. Do you think anything's realistically going to change?
A lot of these governments, they feel like if they just recognize Palestine, then that's enough politically for them to do right now. Because a lot of them are hiding behind recognition from stopping the genocide, from stopping the war. Netanyahu has made it abundantly clear that he's not going to stop. And I think what's happened is a lot of these countries have made the decision that the lives of those 2.3 million people in Gaza is worth the price of them not suffering economic disaster from sanctions from the US if they act on Israel, or the political fallout that it will cause if they do sanction Israel. They have chosen to sacrifice the lives of those 2.3 million people in Gaza, including over 1 million children.
When you're in Gaza, do they feel that anybody is looking out for them, that there's any country, do they know about this, for example, when you've been there? Do people talk about the possibility of a Palestinian state being recognized? Do they talk about any particular countries coming to their aid to help them?
Do you know, the whole Palestinian state thing, we had the Oslo Accords, the PLO at the time disarmed. And what happened to them? What's happened in the West Bank? It's just been an expansion of Israeli settlements ever since the Oslo Accords. There's never been a time where the Israelis have honored some kind of ceasefire agreement. Just look at Lebanon. And this is why, for them, this whole idea of a statehood, what does it even mean to them? The conditions that have been put on this state, you would think that it was them that committed the genocide. The state has to be demilitarized. The state has to have re-education camps for the children. The state has to ensure Israel's security. But they're the ones that have been occupied for over 70 years. They're the ones that have had multiple massacres and now a genocide committed against them. Yet these conditions on this state is just another form of apartheid and another form of colonialism. How can one side have all their rights as a state, a right to have a standing army to defend itself, its right to its borders and self-determination, whereas the other side are not allowed any of those things? The other side have all of these conditions. That, to me, then, isn't equality. It's still an apartheid system. It's just repackaged differently, just like the Oslo Accords was just a repackaging of the occupation. It just entrenched the occupation. It didn't change anything. So I think, Palestinians in Gaza, they don't care about whether we have statehood or not, because, they were imprisoned in Gaza for 20 years after they had democratic elections. And it just goes to show you that it doesn't matter what they do. If they don't do what the Israeli government want to do and what Western governments want them to do, they will not get their freedom. Their freedom comes with conditions, even though it wasn't the Palestinians that committed the atrocities and the crimes of the Second World War. And they're the ones that have been paying the price ever since.
So let's talk about how things could potentially change. I know that you talked about a solar-powered hospital?
Yes.
How would the idea work? Because you wouldn't have the medical supplies, but at least you'd have the power.
When we sat round and we thought about how do we solve this problem, building the infrastructure outside of Gaza and then bringing it into Gaza, that would be the way to do it. Having a self-sustained mobile hospital on wheels that can meet the population wherever it is. If that population is in the center of Gaza, if they've been displaced from the north, it can arrive to them there. If they are pushed out to the Sinai Desert or to South Sudan or wherever it is, we can meet them there. The idea of this hospital is the only way you fight a genocide and the killing is by bringing life, and the only way to do that is with a hospital. And what we need is a mobile, self-sufficient hospital that has all of its supplies, state-of-the-art operating theaters and equipment, pathology labs, intensive care units, pharmacy. All of this is built into the hospital and included in the hospital. And these can be loaded up on trucks, driven into where it needs to go, and it can be assembled like a jigsaw puzzle. And it will have running water, running electricity from its solar panels. That's what we need. We need this as an intermediary step before we rebuild Gaza.
And another way of getting aid in, of course, is the Flotillas, which I know you've been involved in various iterations.
Yes.
Just talk to us about how you work out what aid needs to get in there, and also with these flotillas.
Yes.
Do you genuinely believe that the aid will get through, or is it about just kind of making a point so that people are made aware of what's happening?
I have hope. This is the first time where there has been a global attention on the flotilla, where you have people like Greta Thunberg, where you have Liam Cunningham and A-list Hollywood celebrities involved with the flotillas. Now there's more eyes on the flotilla. Now there's more diplomatic pressure and isolation from Israel from all over the world. And now what we're beginning to see is that what started off as just a ship trying to break the siege and being stopped and being bombed, and in 2010 when they killed those 10 civilians on the flotilla ship, all of this has brought us to this moment. Everything that's happened over the last 70 years in Palestinian history, every single massacre, every single displacement of Palestinians has brought us to this moment. The diaspora have been empowered. The world has begun to see what's going on in Palestine and Gaza and the occupation. And we have civilians mobilizing all around the world to mobilize these civilian ships to break the illegal siege. Countries are cutting diplomatic ties with Israel, where people are beginning to put arms embargoes and sanctions. This has never happened before. And this has come as a result of the world opening up its eyes, and Gaza, and the brave journalists who have been killed reporting on what's going on in Gaza, the doctors who have worked tirelessly to keep these people alive for the last 2 years. This is what this has come and cultivated to. It's cultivated to this moment where we are now at a passage here of we might get a free Palestine, or we might get a final solution.
The world sees these flotillas on the TV, and they see Greta Thunberg. Obviously, she's a very well-known face. She and Donald Trump have got a colourful history themselves because they've gone back and forth. Israel described as a selfie yacht last time, really sort of trying to downplay the significance of it. What about the backlash to all of this advocacy? Is there a backlash? I mean, because I think the approach that appears to give is that they're trying to minimize its importance.
Yeah.
But is there a bigger backlash that you faced?
To me, it doesn't matter what people say, because people are always going to try and discredit it. You know, people talk about Palestinians as human shields. They talk about how, we have to kill and bring down entire apartment buildings to kill 200 people because there's a potential Hamas militant. These excuses now have become worn out, and no matter what you call the flotilla, there has never been more mass mobilization in the world to break the blockade, except for this global flotilla.
But they have, I mean, in the past, they've labeled activists on these flotillas as extremists, as terrorists. They've talked about how they'll take all necessary measures to stop that blockade being broken.
Well, they've killed people before on these flotillas.
Right. And they've got the backing of the United States as well.
Yes.
I mean, do you think you could take on Israel and the United States here?
Well, it's not about taking them on. What it's about is, it's symbolic. It's a symbol of hope here. When the UN have called it a genocide and states are refusing to act, and you have civilians from all around the world, all faiths, all walks of life on these flotillas are Jewish people, are Christians, are Muslims, are Europeans, are Americans, are Arabs, Africans, When you have all of these people on the ships there, this shows that it is a global effort. And yes, it's the United States and Israel that will try and stop these ships, but it's the whole world that's supporting those ships. And you can't downplay hope. You can't downplay hope in a genocide, because when you're going through a genocide in Gaza and the world looks bleak, hope is the currency that they have. And that's what this global Samud Flotilla is doing. It is giving hope to those people in Gaza that even if the world governments stand against you, the world are with you. And that's powerful.
And speaking of hope, I mean, as a doctor, you're one of the few people that can arrive in Gaza and people can feel a sense of hope when they see you.
Yes.
Would you go back a third time?
Yes, I would love to go back.
Do you think you could? Do you think they'd let you?
They've denied me access. I applied to go back in July and I was denied. Part of it might be because I have spoken out so much about the atrocities and the horrors of Gaza. But I also think I would bring too many eyes and ears now into Gaza because I'm a bit more established and well known. Either way, the fight doesn't stop for me. Just because I can't save their lives physically in Gaza, inside Gaza, I can keep fighting for them out here. I think that's the message really to everybody, is we can all do something. Even if they block me or they deny me entry, we can still mobilize in other ways to try and help the people in Gaza.
Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, thank you very much for joining us here on Centre Stage.
Thank you for having me.